I'm Nina Hike, and I'm joining you from Chicago. I work at Chicago Public Schools, George Westinghouse College Prep. And the title of my presentation is Social Justice Science Issues and Green Chemistry. And I also wanted to tell you that my background slide, the background of my slide is a picture of my classroom. It's kind of a Bitmoji classroom that I created during the pandemic when I was teaching. Right. And so I keep it as a background on my first slide because I'm hoping that what you learn here, that you'll take it back to your classroom. And so that's why I keep it as my first slide. So we'll get started. So what I'm going to do is take you through a process that I call me being a teacher as a learner, because oftentimes teachers believe that they've learned all they need to learn, and so all they need to do is just teach the students. And so I've been working through this process, becoming a teacher learner, and so I'm going to take you through it to show you how I arrived at teaching social justice science issues with my students. And so the first part is self-reflection, just thinking about your identities and your science schooling, and then listening and reflecting on each other's stories. So it's very important that we listen to each other's stories and reflect on them. And then that way we can help build our critical consciousness. And then we're able to do some problem posing. And then hopefully with our students, we can become transformative intellectuals. And so let me carry on. So as you listen to me present, you're going to hear me talk about these different parts here. And so hopefully it'll help you want to do some social justice science issues in your classroom. And so I just wanted to tell you my story. So I grew up on the far South Side, and I was doing science because I could walk right across the street. So this is literally like a picture of where I used to live. And so I could walk across the street, and the forest reserve was right across the street. So I would look at insects and plants and things of that nature and take it home and show my mom, and she would talk to me about it. And so at that time, you know, I felt like I was doing science and my mom was doing science, and we were doing it because we loved it, right? We liked doing it together. And so that's what we did. And so one of the things that I did notice when I was younger, and that's a picture of me too, when I was younger, one of the things that I did notice is that when we would leave and come back home, there was this odor that we could smell. So we knew that we were close to our house because there was this odor in the air. And so I just want you to keep thinking about, you know, that part of the story, the odor. And my parents would say that, oh, it's probably from pollution or something. And so I would just be like, oh, okay. And so we would just carry on. And so fast forward to me going to college, I got into my, you know, science and chemistry. I had Professor Wink, and he kind of led me into really loving chemistry and doing chemistry. So I did a lot of work with chemistry and really, you know, became competent in science and things of that nature. And so I was able to really go through it and get good scores and things of that nature and start teaching in Chicago Public Schools. And so I just wanted to make sure you knew that in between, you know, after I was in the forest preserve, that I got formal science training, and you know, it was fun and I enjoyed it. And so then those, you know, me taking the formal science learning that I did, it didn't really help me investigate the smell that I would smell when I went home back to my community in the Old Girl Gardens on the far South Side. And so even though I was competent in traditional science learning and, you know, being able to, you know, tell you all about redox reactions and things of that nature, it didn't help me to investigate the smell. And so thinking about, like, you know, fast forward till now, the smell, it became something really real. And so, my parents kept talking about the pollution. And so I started reading about Pablo Freire, and he said that, as teachers, we need to have a critical consciousness, and that we needed to be able to state where we are in the social inequality and understand our place in it and take action against the oppressive elements in our society. And so I kind of started thinking about that and thinking about the smell. And so then in my science teaching, I brought the story to my students. And that's where I developed this problem posing letter. And so I kind of told my students the same story about what happened in the Old Girl Gardens and how I smelled that smell. And then it just happened to be during the pandemic, they imploded a coal power plant in Chicago, and it was a lot of pollution in the air. And so that kind of brought back the story about the smell from the Old Girl Gardens when I grew up. And so I started thinking, like, are these stories related to each other? And then there were more stories. There was another General Iron power plant. So I was like, wow, this is a lot of things happening. And so I developed this problem posing letter to give to my students so that we can kind of use it to shape, like, to talk about the social justice science issue. And I was just sharing, like, my life with them and me learning about, you know, that the smell is definitely something. Something causing that smell. And even though I didn't learn about it in college or in high school, it was time for me, to kind of think about what was happening with the smell. And so this is kind of how I present, one of the ways that I present the social justice science issues to my students. And so hopefully you have a copy of it so you can see it up close. And so then I started really thinking about, like, how can I really incorporate this? Because a lot of times when you talk about social justice science issues, people say that it's not real science. So then I started researching, and I found that John Stone's triangle, another professor, scholar, had modified it and added the human element. And so I said, well, maybe the human element can be social justice science issues. So I modified the John Stone's triangle, and I started to think about, like, how can I talk to my students about the submicroscopic and the symbolic, and also make sure that they understand the macroscopic, which is what they were experiencing in the environment that we live in. And so this is how I kind of brought the story, together to bring it to my students. And so just to make sure that we're all on the same page, so I define the social justice science issue as issues that sit at the intersection of the science we are asked to teach and the issues to which students or their communities are committed. And that's from Dr. Danny Morales-Doyle from UIC. I like his definition of it. And so then when I'm thinking about macroscopic models with my students, we create drawings, and students have to label their drawings, and they have to say whatever they're observing in terms of the experimentation or phenomena that we're observing. And so they're creating and labeling their own drawings. And then the submicroscopic level is where we're representing elements, subscripts, and atoms and coefficients. And then symbolic would be the chemical symbols and chemical formulas. And so to further kind of push myself over there into the social justice science issue arena, of course, I'm working with the next generation science standards. And so this standard that for this lesson that I'm sharing today is called the high school physical science 1-1 is using the periodic table as a model to predict the relative properties of elements based on the patterns of electrons and the outermost energy level of atoms. And so one of my friends suggested that if we're gonna, like, do the social justice science issues, maybe we can modify the performance expectation so that we can kind of put it inside of that. And so I modified it. And so as you can see here, I put in that we're gonna be looking at heavy metals and their persistence in the air, water, soil as pollutants. And so bringing the social justice science issue together with the NGSS has been, like, really helpful. to make it that real science that we're looking for. Because like I said, a lot of people think that if you talk about social issues, that you're not doing science, but just trying to make that merger so that people could feel comfortable with it. And I can feel comfortable with it too, right? Because I'm a scientist, right? I'm a traditionally scientist, and I want to feel comfortable in that I'm still feel like I'm doing science, right? But I'm also talking about the issues that when we think about green chemistry, the reason why it's so is difficult to take up sometimes is because when you're learning about chemistry, you're really not learning about the toxicity that it causes and the environmental impacts. It's just, let's learn about it so that we can make new things and help society, but not really talking about the toxicity and the environmental impact. And so I feel like that's where the social justice science issues come in so that we can kind of think about those things. And so the way that I kind of bring it in to students is that I wanted to make the social justice science issues local issues. And so these are just me going to the newspapers and finding local issues that I can use to shape my lessons with students. And so you can see that in Chicago and I think across the US, there's a lot of lead in the soil. And then there's a lot of air pollution, and then in the pipes, lead pipes and things of that nature. And so just getting students to be able to critically read news articles and kind of think of science that they're seeing in it. Thinking about the science that they see in it, and kind of like keeping that in mind as we go through the unit to help them kind of think about what's happening in their communities. And so then we kind of look at heavy metals, and a lot of students are like, when they see this, they say, well, the elements, they can harm us, you know? And so just shifting that idea that, you know, yes, the elements have done great things for us. They help us with our phones and gas and things of that nature, but really we do need to start thinking about also the harm that they cause. And so this is when, you know, students start to see like, wow, you know, elements can cause us harm because they really didn't think that they could. And so just getting them to kind of think about the fact that, you know, the elements can be toxic and have impacts on the environment. And so then we kind of focus on lead and kind of really dig into like, why are we using lead and what is it being used for? So students can kind of think about that. And then we get into like the processing of how they process lead. So that's how we can kind of think about how can we kind of look at those processes so that we can kind of think about how could we redesign it to be safer for the environment before, you know, we start to use it. And so the students are like learning about the smelting of lead and kind of thinking about those the processes that go along with it. And so then, you know, we're really digging into like the chemical reactions that take place. And then students are then making models of it so that they can kind of really understand what's happening so that they can then think about like, how can we design this, you know, redesign this process to make it safer so that we aren't like dealing with this lead. Like, what can we do? And so then we get into the modeling. And so just having students really draw pictures, right? And I know this is chemistry, yes, and students should draw pictures and label them. And so, and you'll be surprised, like you have a lot of students that like to draw, right? And they're able to get their ideas out and kind of show you that they are understanding like the processes that are happening. And so, and no two students' drawings are alike. And so students really get into this and then also next represented it with the chemical equation. So going from the macroscopic level, that's, you know, getting out into the community and then looking at it as a chemical equation and then also transforming it into a sub-microscopic model. And so this is actually, I don't want to take credit for this. This is actually one of my students from some years ago, drawings and things of that nature. So I don't want you to think that this is my creation. And so, like I said, students are really drawing pictures so that they can understand how is the lead process. Like before it becomes, a battery in the car, parts of the battery of the car, like how is it being processed so that they can understand how can they change that process so that we can, have it to where it's not causing all of this harm to the environment. And so after that, I have another example where students are creating, models too, where this is dealing with the Little Village coal power plant implosion. And so just using the local stories as the kind of backdrop and also bringing it in and saying, hey, create your image of it, your macroscopic model, and then what else is going on with it. So you still are creating your Bohr models and things of that nature and looking at chemical formulas, but really getting them to be scientifically literate to be able to communicate the science that they're learning within the social justice science issue, like the coal power plant being imploded in a Little Village. And so here's another example. Of course, this is kind of the one that's been out in the national news. This is with Flint water crisis. And again, these are student papers. This is not my creation here. I want to give credit to the students here that made these. And so this is just an image that students created, a macroscopic model, and then they were able to then really detail the macroscopic and then show in the submicroscopic model what was happening, and then finally using scientific principles to try to explain like what was happening in terms of the redox reactions and things of that nature that were taking place that caused the pollution. And so just really kind of wrapping the issue of the Flint water crisis and not just teaching periodic trends and things of that nature separately, kind of building it into the social justice science issue so that they can be together as one. So it's not like you're teaching about the social justice science issue over here and then the chemistry over there. So it's like that we want to unite them as one so that students can feel like not just these stories, but their stories, right? Because they live here in Chicago and they're experiencing this pollution in their communities. And so I feel like instead of us teaching about something that's far away or that happened 200 BC, we can teach students about the science that's happening in their communities. And I think that that's more effective. And a lot of students want to learn about their communities and what's happening there. And so this has been really an awesome endeavor. And so I feel like students and me, as a teacher, I was able to become a transformative intellectual, right? Because I told you about the smell, right? And then I did some work and researched and found out that it was from pollution from the neighborhood. And I found this image of a woman from back then, and she was covering her face up just like we were doing during the pandemic when they imploded the coal power plant. And then I also found out that Hazel Johnson was there, and she was actually investigating these issues. And she named it the toxic donut, where I grew up. And so I was able to connect all those stories to be able to then, teach that. And I kind of feel like all of the different aspects of my life, like my community, me growing up and dealing with the pollution, that since I can share those stories with students or share like a story that's happening in their community, that it builds students agency to be confident to talk about science in a way that empowers them to help their communities. And so I think that that's why I've been so drawn to it and being able to, and because it's my story, right? So it's not just their story, it's my story too. And so I want to go back to the green chemistry. So in order for students to be transformative intellectuals and feel like they can share their stories with each other, and teachers have to be able to share their stories with each other. So then we can go into the green chemistry and start thinking about ways to design safer chemicals and chemical processes. And so this is how I feel like that's how we build that with our classrooms and helping students and teachers, because you have to share your story so that you can listen to student stories too. And I think that's it for me.